Welcome to episode 1 of the Fragomen FC Passport to North America 2026 podcast, hosted by Fragomen.
We're very excited to formally introduce our podcast series leading up to the 2026 World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico.
Throughout this series, we're going to be joined by an amazing team of guests from all around the world who will bring you the most up-to-date content on global mobility, travel, and football.
And we're going to talk about real association football in this podcast, not American football. Now, we have an amazing show for you, and I promised one of our guests, Azeem, that I would not refer to football as soccer today. So let's see how far I get before I make that mistake.
So without further ado, it's our pleasure to introduce Azeem Mohiuddin, who's a partner at Fragomen's Qatar office, as well as Aarij Wasti, Director, Legal and Compliance at the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022, and partner at Gowling WLG right here in Toronto.
So first off, we're just so thankful to have you both on the show. I'm going to allow Azeem and Aarij to introduce themselves a bit further, but I did want to get the conversation going. Aarij and Azeem were both at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, and I'd like to ask them about their experiences. Azeem, tell us what it was like to be there.
Oh, thanks very much, Jake, Rick, and Sergio for having us. Great to be here with you today. But Jake, remember we had a podcast a couple of months ago, and after that, I had a lot of envious colleagues asking me about my experiences because they didn't realize I went to so many games.
How many?
I went to about 7 in the end.
Okay.
So, I mean, probably not as many compared to Aarij, but I was at about a number of the group games, but I was also very fortunate. I went to the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and the finals.
Okay, but the final counts for that final counts for 10. So I think, you did well.
I mean, it did cost me an arm and a leg, but it was definitely worth it. It was one of the best things I've ever done in my life. For me, it wasn't just symbolic that the World Cup was being held in this part of the world. There was so much more to it than that. There was a lot of pride from everyone who was involved. And I think one of the best legacies for me has been that my kids are really into football now. So it's Project Mbappe is what we call it at home. So we're really getting our kids into it, and seeing stepovers at 2 a.m. But it's been a really, really good experience, and I can't believe it's been just over a year already. It feels like it was yesterday. The post World Cup blues have started to dissipate, but still, nonetheless, it was an amazing experience, and I really hope you guys get to enjoy it when it's your time. Aarij, what about you?
Well, first of all, thanks for the warm welcome and the kind words of introduction. It's great to be here. Always good to see you, my friend, here in Doha. Believe it or not, Jake, that is probably the toughest question I'll get today. That event brings back so many different emotions. We'll come back to the football, but vindication for everything that we fought for, and we fought long and hard, for hosting rights here in Qatar. Kind of affirmation of the values that we stood for, humanity, togetherness, unity across divides, something that sadly the world seems to have forgotten a little bit, in 2023. And, you used the right word, pride. There was a tremendous amount of pride, not just within the team, having a good fortune to work with colleagues that worked not just with their minds, but with their hearts and souls, but also the pride of, really helping build a country and an infrastructure that is one for the ages. I mean, people visit this country now and they're just wowed. And it isn't just about football, or I'll use the word soccer. It was always part of a national vision. And I think, a great many pillars from that vision have been fulfilled. So it's been fantastic. And then, of course, the football, coming back to that, you look at Morocco's journey, almost became the home darlings at some point. Croatia performing the way that they did again. And then, of course, I know your family's Mbappe fan, but, with Messi being crowned king, that was a phenomenal moment. I'll tell you, beIN Sport last night, in fact, showed a replay of the final as if it was a year ago, right? So at 6 p.m. there was kickoff, and we had friends and neighbors put on their jerseys, and they actually relived the moment.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get a chance to watch the final last year.
Oh, really?
Well, I was
busy,
tied up a little bit.
I guess, yeah.
But you know what I did last night? I couldn't be near a TV. I went outside and I barbecued. And the reason for that is because, as strange as it sounds, once I've seen the final, I know that it's over. And for me, that acceptance is a really tough thing after all these years. But look, I'm not an idiot. Reality is 22's in the past. We're almost in 2024. and 26 is around the corner. So let's start talking about the future.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you just, I know you guys are in Doha right now. Can you just tell us a little bit about the setting in the background that you're in?
Yeah, so we go for a little bit of a walk later, but this is in Al Bida Tower, which is the HQ for 2022, is the headquarters for Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy after the bid was awarded to Qatar. It also housed the FIFA offices as well as the Q22 offices during the event. And we're sitting in a room known as the Majlis. The Majlis, for sort of people from outside the region is, let's call it a gathering place, almost like an informal family room. And if we panned around, we'd show you, but it's basically seating in a almost horseshoe shape, which sort of encourages dialogue. And it's a room that you've used for other meetings with AmCham and others. We've used this really as a place to gather and have dialogue. Whether it's with stakeholders, whether it's with partners and others, and that this Majlis is part of a floor that's known as the Legacy Pavilion, which sort of showcases, almost like a museum, Qatar's journey pre-bid, through the bid, and into the World Cup.
And during the World Cup, a lot of families actually opened up their majlises to the public. So it was really fun to see all these guys in Argentina kits, Spain kits, going to a local majlis, having a good time. There's always so much food available in the majlis. Not so much today, but it's the setting here is it's incredible. It's really, really nice. So thanks for arranging, Aarij, as well.
My pleasure.
Of course, it was great, Aarij and Azeem. Thank you very much for being here. We're delighted. And just about the story, I had the pleasure of witnessing the final, and it was the most exciting final I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing. So it was just amazing. But let's go about the number of teams in the World Cup. Since 1998, the World Cup has featured 32 teams, with the tournament now expanding to 48 in 2026. How might FIFA's expectations change?
Look, from my perspective, I don't think they do. If anything, it's just more of the same, more consistency across more participating nations, across more venues, and in the case of 2026, across 3 countries. And look, that's not an easy ask, because you're talking about within the football space a very, very high level of standards, whether it's for teams, whether it's for guests, whether it's for different fan groups. So I don't think there's a lot of change in terms of those expectations. The change that I would kind of point to is actually the greater diversity in terms of the participants, both in terms of teams and in terms of the fan base. You're looking at an expanded format, 48 teams, which means greater participation from every confederation. We're likely to see the return of Colombia and Chile from South America, possibly even Venezuela. I'm not wagering here. I'm just taking wild guesses. From Africa, possibly the likes of Burkina Faso and Mali for the first time. Obviously, the return of Egypt and Mo Salah, probably, I guess, to the World Cup, which would be fantastic. The GCC is always an interesting one, but Oman, maybe, possibly the UAE. I think, either way, I think there'll be a lot of interest in this part of the world. Europe, obviously, you'll have the return of Italy, fingers crossed. But this time, North Macedonia perhaps as well, as opposed to, instead of. And then, Curacao from the Caribbean, perhaps. So really kind of across the board, I think, new entrants, lots of diversity. It's going to mean new fan bases being introduced to the world on TV, but in stadiums, it's going to mean new participating nations, new languages, and new cultures, which is always fantastic for the game.
Yeah. And I think just on that point, just looking at our experience here. Aarij mentioned a whole series of new countries being involved. Just from our experience in Qatar, the legacy that you see that's been left behind from that investment in a sport, it would be incredible to see that same kind of phenomena happening in these other countries too. So I think it's not just about the tournament itself; it's about what happens after, which I think will be very, very interesting to see as well.
I think you guys make a good point. I mean, you might even take it further and say, in Asia, North Korea, China, perhaps, it really, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of countries that have never participated before. And I sort of wanted to touch on what you were talking about, Arish. So more specifically, what are some of the expectations FIFA has of a host country or countries? Um, Obviously, it's Mexico, the United States, and Canada hosting. Each one will have requirements placed upon them by FIFA, and I wouldn't mind if you sort of expand on what FIFA will be requiring of the host countries.
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, kind of coming back to that thread about consistency and a consistent level of service. When we're talking about fans, it's going to all be all about mobility and the seamless ability to travel. Now that for various reasons, presents quite a complex sort of challenge, or puts quite a complex challenge on the table for North America. We know that U.S. visa requirements are very different to requirements in Mexico and even from Canada. So I think there are going to continue to be. I know there are meetings right now between FIFA security and the governments of the three hosts to look at how closely they can align, how seamless they can in fact make it for fans, and where there will still need to be kind of unique requirements, which will hopefully be decided in advance, which will allow FIFA and the host countries to communicate those to relevant parties, so that where necessary or where needed, people can get the right assistance and the right advice on time.
So, Azim, what was Qatar's experience like vis-a-vis FIFA as it related to mobility, visa issuance, security, those types of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think the context is really important to answer that question, Jake. Qatar, population of just under 3 million people, and we were expecting about 1.5 million people to come for the World Cup, right? So 50% increase in the population. Now that puts a lot of pressure on, infrastructure, on expectations. Again, going back to what we wanted to deliver as a country, right? We wanted to make it a success. But in addition to that, it's also important to understand in our region, it's the fact that security concerns are very, very real, and they're taken very seriously by the authorities. It's no coincidence that Doha was voted the second safest city in the world. I think number one was Abu Dhabi last year. So that's a really important facet of the consideration. So when you put those two things together, we knew that there was going to be some kind of immigration regime put in place to handle that kind of influx of people into the country. And in the end, the Qataris, the authorities, we proceeded with the Haya card system, which is fan ID. A fan ID in of itself is not unique, but the way that it was done for the Qatar 2022 World Cup, in my view, very much was unique. It was a digitalized platform, a pretty seamless application process. Obviously it takes time for any new process to be bedded in, but once it was, I think it was overall a very successful program. And that hire card was, your visa to the country, your access to the stadiums, access to certain venues and free public transport, all on one all-encompassing app. So from that perspective, it was a very, very good program. It's been so successful that since the World Cup, it's actually been expanded, and it now allows people can apply for a hire now to come to the country. So if you don't qualify for a visa on arrival, for example, if you're coming for a business trip, you can now apply for a hire card. So again, when we talk about legacy, what was done is actually provided quite a good platform to then be used, going forward. So that would be our overall assessment that any kind of system, immigration system, will need to be context specific, but the easier it is to use, the better it is from a fan experience perspective, but also just getting people here on time to enjoy the World Cup.
Just by way of
Yeah, and that
background,
Haya card. Sorry, go ahead, Arj.
Sorry, Jake. So just to kind of give some background on the Haya card, the concept of the Haya, of course, evolved from 2018. where the Russians had implemented, sort of a fan ID. But the background to that is a lot of these principal requirements are embedded in the hosting documentation, right? So in Qatar's case, we of course had the government guarantees.
Yeah.
And the relevant government guarantee there is Government Guarantee 1, which talks about entry and exit permits, work permits, immigration, etc. And the concept or the principles, if you will, the pillars in that particular guarantee was very simple. It was twofold. One was being able to get the right people into the country. So whether that was service providers, FIFA itself, workers, or fans. And then the second was a expedited process for exemptions where needed, so that people, regardless of work status, nationality, etc., could get into the country to do their jobs and allow for the World Cup to be organized. So it's, I think what you're talking about is that end product, which took a lot of work to get to, but the principles, of course, are agreed on day one, and for us that was way back in 2010.
Thanks, Aarij. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to talk about how it was implemented in Russia, and it should be interesting to see how it's. No, it's okay. Great minds think alike, and it should be interesting to see how it's implemented here. In 2026 across 3 countries. Are we going to have individual cards? Will there be a card at all? Is it going to span across all 3 countries? I'm just looking at some statistics here. So it looks like 1.85 million visitors attended FIFA Fan Fest in Doha. You had the top 10 visitor nationalities from the GCC, India, US, UK, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Mexico, and Sudan. And just to talk about the security in the region, there were no major security incidents, and that's really important. And Azeem, I know we hit a little bit on soccer fans and football fans. I did it. I said soccer. I apologize.
You said it. You said
It
How long
took a
did
while.
that take? That took. Yeah, it's not bad. It took you 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
20 minutes. 20 minutes.
in.
Okay, 20 minutes. I did. I apologize, Azeem. But you were talking about the security incidents, and we were talking about on our last series, hooligans in football, and how it is hard to mark who's a supporter of a certain club who's had a security incidents in their past. So I think that's interesting. I think the government of Qatar did a really good job with that, and it's going to take a lot of work between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. to identify these types of players.
Yeah, I mean, look, whenever England loses a game, we always are obviously upset, but I was a bit nervous. But this time round, when they lost, it was absolutely fine because we knew it would be, nonetheless, it would be a very safe environment. So I'm not to single out England fans, of course, but I'm just, the principle of safety was very, very important. And you could see it, families were going to matches, walking around 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and it was absolutely fine. So, that aspect I think was definitely a very, very key component on the success of the World Cup here.
But if you allow me to make an observation, I actually credit the fans a lot for that environment. I mean, yes, okay, fine. Qatar as a country did a lot to put the infrastructure in place and facilitate security and a secure environment, etc. But let's be honest, the reason why there wasn't hooliganism, the reason why there was very limited crowd misbehavior, the reason why people were, safe to walk around regardless of the shirt or the flag or the scarf they were wearing, is because people came here, quite frankly, I think, with a fantastic mindset. They came to enjoy the football. They came to actually experience the culture and kind of, be that bridge between cultures. And they came to represent the best of their own countries. And that's, to me, what actually, going back to that first question, that's one of the things that made this tournament really, really unique and special.
Yeah, and even, just in terms of the volunteers who were involved in the World Cup, I think there was like over 420,000 applications. And looking at who, in fact, in the end were the volunteers, a span of 150 countries. So you had a really diverse number of people from all different backgrounds working across not just the kind of the service provision, but also within the volunteering sector as well. And everybody just felt very comfortable with with what was happening. So I just think it was such a great team effort that supported this great concept that Aarij is talking about, but in the end, which just allowed everyone to have a really, really good time.
So I think now I want to turn it over to the business side of things. And, Azim, I want to ask you, what are the best ways for host countries to communicate with businesses to ensure that there is no impact on the ability to mobilize employees? Any advice for companies in this regard? What did you see coming into Qatar, and what advice do you have for those coming to the US, Mexico, and Canada?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So it's it's one that is difficult to answer um, early, and what I mean by that is we knew in Qatar that there was going to be a immigration system in place for the World Cup, right? Because contextually, the size of the country, all those kind of good things I was talking about earlier. What we didn't know necessarily was what the impact would be on normal business immigration for our clients and companies. So some companies obviously had contracts as it relates to the World Cup, to delivery of services, and to Aaraj's earlier point, there was an agreement between FIFA to ensure seamless entry of these folks. But there are a number of subcontractors. You have companies who may not have contracts with the whole kind of World Cup setup, but nonetheless still need to get people in. And again, contextually, understanding that within our region, migrant workers make up a huge proportion of the population. So the need for business immigration is always going to be there. Now, for best will in the world, it's never going to be possible for a government to tell you, 8, 9 months in advance what an immigration policy is going to be. They can have an idea, but only closer to the time will that actually then be articulated in sufficient detail. So the earlier a government can tell the community, the business community, about what a program would look like, the more time you would allow them to be able to put plans in place. Now, what we did in Qatar was, because we knew there was going to be a system in place, we kind of worked through different scenarios with our clients, right? All the way from there's going to be no impact to business immigration, all the way there's going to be full impact to business immigration. Everything's going to be shut down. So what can you do in advance to mitigate or at least reduce your risk insofar as that's possible? So what we did with each scenario, we kind of worked out what would be the best course of action. So, for example, if we're thinking, right, there's going to be a full shutdown of immigration applications, then let's try to get your people into the country before the World Cup kicks off, right? So that includes things like, and again, I think Jake, I mentioned to you before, in Qatar, when you have a work visa, it's valid for 3 months. So there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to get that visa well in advance, knowing that if you are told that you can't come in during the World Cup, you have your visa, you can come in earlier. So working through those scenarios. The other thing that we worked with our clients was, again, getting yourself in the best possible shape if there are going to be restrictions on immigration, or even if they are not, making sure that you're in the right shape to be able to pull that trigger and get people into the country. So that's things like getting your labor quotas in place, making sure your corporate compliance is correct. You don't want to get to a situation where you can bring people into the country and then you realize your immigration license is expired, right? So you want to get everything done well in advance to allow you to be in the best possible position. And the one thing I can tell you is, in the end, it was possible to still obtain visas during the World Cup period for companies. Things were a bit slower, and understandably so, but still, those companies who were better, who planned better, definitely fared better than those who just kind of took a wait and see approach. So the earlier you can plan, the better. And if you know who you need to get into the country, if you can get visas earlier than they need to be on the ground, that would be definitely a pro. And then the other thing to consider is compliance. So we talk about the higher visa. The higher visa was for people to enter to the country to enjoy the World Cup. It wasn't for people to come and start undertaking hands-on work for a completely different project, right? So it's very important in our line of work to make sure that those distinctions are clear to our clients as well. So again, just because there is an ability to enter the country, you still need to be very careful about what they are doing once they are in the country, and to not blur that line between tourism and work. So these kind of messages are really important, and the earlier that the government can give these messages, the the easier it is for businesses to plan.
I think
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think that's really insightful from a service provider perspective. If you allow me, from a FIFA client perspective, this very similar concerns for commercial partners of FIFA, of suppliers of FIFA, the likes of HBS and Match Hospitality. The two kind of groups that come to mind in terms of needing the most work is from our perspective. One was hospitality workers, so food handling licenses and certificates were quite nuanced and complex in terms of the process.
Yeah.
So where are they coming from? What are their backgrounds? Do they have licenses in their home countries? Are those recognized here? What sort of health screenings do they need to go through, and when? And then obviously to that there's a cost element, and where clients haven't thought about costing those or budgeting those in, that can kind of change the bottom line, and you've still got to comply.
Yeah, and
Of course, Rich.
just to add to that, the added complexity is also the realities and the practicalities on the grounds, right? So you can have the policy, you can have the communication, but it's also important to understand that whilst you may have that, what happens on a day-to-day might be very different. And one of the things that we took into consideration was the capacity of decision makers. They're going to be very busy with FIFA-related immigration applications. Are they going to be able to be as focused on other types of applications as well? And the answer was, some occasions yes, and other times no, because of depending on what was going on. So it's exactly what Aarij just said, but also take into consideration those more practical elements for what our clients need. And I think, Jake, when you and I spoke last, there are lots of countries where you need to make consular applications, right?
Yeah.
And where that's going to be the case, will they have the same capacity? Probably not. Will things take slightly longer? Probably it will do. So, it's those kind of practical tips that I definitely think would be worth honing in with from a business immigration perspective.
Absolutely, and I wanted to hit on the consular aspect of this, and think about Qatar. If you did have to do a consular route, it would have just been for one country. But in the U.S. and Mexico and Canada, it could potentially be three if you want to catch games in all three of those countries. So just the process time, the planning is going to be so important to plan ahead.
Of course, and to that point, Aarij, how might the U.S., Canada, and Mexico approach the fund basis on visiting nations? Considering all the distance between these three massive countries, should teams have to play across borders into the group stage? How about the knockout stages? How do you think this will turn out?
Yeah, look, this is one of those fun topics, right? So if you opened a Sports Illustrated back when there were hard copies, I don't know if they still print those magazines, but in tournaments like in Russia, prior to that in Brazil, go back all the way to US in '94, and you'll often find a lot of number crunching and analysis around travel times and how that's going to impact teams and performance and the rest of it, right? So let's now look at that from a fan perspective, particularly where you're talking about, in theory, as of now, 3 different visa systems. Look, it'll all come down to the format. It'll come down to obviously the final draw and the schedule. But let's be honest. I think all said and done, I would be very, very surprised if most teams, if not all, end up playing in at least 2 countries. The further you progress, I guess the probability sort of increases that you might even play across 3 countries. The example that kind of rings true to me, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2018, there was a Spain-Morocco match in Kaliningrad. And if you kind of open up an atlas and you look at where Kaliningrad is, you've got to actually go through Latvia and Lithuania, right? And where's that? Well, that's in the Schengen zone. And so a lot of Moroccan fans that particular morning got to the train stations in mainland Russia, boarded. The train moved a little bit. Inspectors came on and said, "You got to get off the train because you don't have visas." And they said, "What? Nobody told us about this." I won't go into what the solution was, but suffice it to say, there was a lot of angst that morning at FIFA HQ. There was a lot of angst at the 2018 headquarters, and the team at the stadium was panicking because they thought, "Well, we've got all these burgers. What do we do with them?" Look, all ends well, right? So the stadium was full by match time, and everybody got to take in a fantastic game, but it was a close one.
Well, listen, I think this has been fantastic. It's been a great discussion. We have a lot to think about as we progress to 2026. As we mentioned earlier, we do have the Copa America coming up in 2024, the recently announced FIFA Club World Cup, which I believe is called the Mundial de Club, officially by FIFA. I want to thank you both, Aarij and Azeem. But before I let you go, this is what they're all playing for, and I know you guys are the first guests we have, first episode. So I wanted to ask you. I know we're far way out, and I think I know how you're going to answer, Azeem. But I'd like to ask you, who do you think will be taking this replica, the real one, home in 2026?
I'll let you take this one.
England.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay.
It's coming home, finally.
Second time for everything, I guess.
promise you that.
And Aarij, what do you think? Are you allowed to answer?
Oh, yeah, I guess. Look, I'm going to say, it's going to be a South American team again. I can't say which one.
Sure.
But
Well, I mean, if we look back, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it'll be a really, really interesting tournament. I think the 48-team format is going to open things up. I hope the format kind of encourages a few upsets and surprises.
It's our fourth time in North America. In 1970, Mexico. We had Brazil, 86 in Mexico. Argentina, 94 Brazil. So I guess we'll wait and see what 2026 brings. Listen, I want to thank you guys very much for taking your time today. It was very generous of you. Jake, Sergio, thank you also. For all our guests, we do appreciate it. And for our audience, please keep an eye out for future episodes of the Fragomen FC Passport to North America 2026 podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rick.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Azeem and Aarij. It was
Thanks,
wonderful
everyone.
having you here. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Jake.
See you guys soon. Take care.
Bye, guys.
To our listeners, thank you for listening to this series. Share your questions with us using hashtag Fragomen FC. We'll be sure to get back to you, whether it's on LinkedIn or on the show itself. Thanks.